Hey everybody, and welcome to my third of 3 videos on the Canon EOS T1i. In this video we're going to go over everything that's in the menu system. So grab your camera, flip it over, turn it on, hit the menu button, and we're going to get going here. We're going to start here looking at the menu navigation. Along the top you're going to have a row of tabs, and each tab's going to have a bunch of different items underneath it, okay? So we navigate the tabs by hitting left and right, and we navigate the items by hitting up and down, and when we get to one that we want to access, we hit the set button, and that will bring us up to the menu items, which we can then access by using the control pad buttons, well, mostly left and right. These red ones here are called the image menu. The blue one, and there's 2 of those. The blue ones are the playback menu. There's 2 of those. Yellow ones are the settings menus, or configuration. I forget which it's called in this camera model. There's 3 of those. And then the green one, the star, is my menu. And at the very near the end, I'll show you how to add items to my menu so that you can quickly access things that you use frequently. Under the third settings item, there's a custom functions. We're going to do these very last. So if there's a specific thing you're looking for in this anywhere in this menu system, I have links in the video description to take you to timestamps for each of the main menu tabs, and from there you can get pretty close to finding exactly what you need to access. We're going to start here in image menu 1, and we're just going to go straight into quality. So these are your options: large, medium, and small, and each of the JPEGs. These are all JPEGs up here. And this means your camera will save images as JPEG. Each of the JPEG options has a fine resolution and a coarse resolution. Coarse resolution gives you more space on your SD card. RAW plus JPEG, or RAW only. If you're using Windows 10 and later, you don't need to use RAW plus JPEG, because Windows 10 will display your RAW files as thumbnails. RAW plus JPEG was useful back in the days of Windows 7 and earlier, where Windows could not display RAW file thumbnails. Now that memory cards are pretty cheap, back when this came out they were not, it makes no sense to use JPEGs because RAW gives you a lot more editing capability, and you don't have as much memory card concern as you did back in the day, when a lot of people who were buying these cameras were also getting them with 4 and 8 gig SD cards instead of whatever size I have in here now, which is holding 1800 photos, I think. Beep on or off is simply a matter of whether you want your camera to beep when it does stuff or not. I generally recommend off for this, simply because it's annoying. The beep is annoying. If you don't need to have that audio confirmation, there's no reason to have it. Release shutter without card is going to be enable or disable. If you enable it, when you press the shutter and there's no SD card in here, then the camera will pretend to take a photo. It won't take a photo, it'll just pretend. If you set this to disable, then this is a really quick way to turn on your camera, hit the shutter button, and if nothing happens, then you know that you don't have an SD card and you'd better grab one before you go out shooting for the day. Review time is anywhere from off to 8 seconds or hold. This is how long the image will display on your LCD screen after you take it. Just as a matter of battery preservation, I tend to recommend off. Also, it's a good habit to get into not to immediately look at all your photos, because that's going to teach you that if you mess up a photo, there are consequences and you need to get better at it. So 2 really good reasons to leave that to off. Peripheral illumination correction, enable or disable. What this does is that most lenses have light loss towards the edges. The center of the image is brighter, the edges it's dimmer. If you enable this, the camera is going to run algorithms that reduce or eliminate the light loss at the peripheries so that your illumination is more even across the entire image. I personally go with disable, because that illumination correction on old cameras like this will add a bit of noise in the corners, but also you lose a lot of the character of the images that the lenses create. So personal preference ultimately, whether you go with enable or disable, but disable is going to show you how your lenses perform more accurately. Red eye on or off. This is will your flash pulse prior to taking a photo to help prevent red eye by shrinking your human subject's pupils. Matter of personal preference and how you use your flash for this one. And flash control, here are your different options. flash firing is enable or disable. Do you want the camera to fire a flash? Let's leave that on enable. Built-in flash function settings. So here are different settings you can change for your pop-up flash. Okay, flash mode, it's locked to ETTL. Not sure why it's doing that. Might be a later setting. But let's take a look at what we can change. Oh, here it is, because it's down at the bottom. Shutter sync, first or second curtain. If you remember from the first video, I said your flash fires, first curtain opens and second curtain closes, and your flash fires in that time frame. This is going to allow you to change that. With first curtain, as soon as your first curtain finishes the travel, the flash will then fire. Second curtain will close and then reset. With second curtain, the first curtain will complete its travel. The flash will fire just before the second curtain starts traveling, and then you'll have a reset. If your shutter speed is 1/200th of a second, this makes no difference. This only applies to longer shutter speeds. So let's say you had a 10-second shutter speed, and the flash was on. You could have a friend riding a skateboard with some like reflectors on or something, or like some LED lights around them, and start the photo. Your friend rolls through the scene. The LED lights are recorded by the sensor. At the very end, right before that second curtain, flash fires, illuminates your friend, so it looks like your friend is riding with a string of lights trailing behind them. So basically, this is just a matter of how you want to use your flash and what kind of creative objectives you want to have with it. Flash exposure compensation is +2 to -2. This allows you to add more power to your flash or remove power from your flash manually. And then ETTL2, this is your light meter that's going to be used by your flash, evaluative or average. So basically, your evaluative is the standard evaluative meter that you would get with your regular meter setting. Average takes the entire scene evenly and averages all of the different readings from the meter together to give you an overall scene. Average does work well for flashes. Evaluative tends to work better for using a flash when you have things like chrome or glass in the scene that could reflect your flash unevenly. External flash function settings. If you have a flash, a Canon speedlight specifically, connected to your flash, you can have the exact same settings we just went over for that external flash. External flash custom functions. We don't have a flash hooked up, so same issue here. We can't see those, but those allow you to adjust some custom functions on your speedlight. Clear external flash custom functions allows you to reset the custom functions that you've set up on this camera for your speedlight. And that's it for Image tab 1. We're going to go here to Image tab 2. The first one here is Exposure Compensation Auto Exposure Bracketing. So this allows you to turn on auto exposure bracketing. We're going to set that at 0. If we just adjust this to the left or right, we get exposure compensation, which is the exact same function we get when we hold this button down and adjust the command wheel on the front when we're in any auto aperture priority, shutter priority, or program mode. Okay, we're going to leave this here for now. Next, I'm going to go up to the command wheel on the front here, and I'm going to rotate it, and you can now see that I've got a second row. And this second row is your auto exposure bracketing. So these indicate that you're going to take 3 photos. Currently, one that's a stop under, properly exposed, and a stop over. You can go up to 2 stops in either direction, right? And if we hold the AV button down, nope, it's not letting me do that. Why isn't it? Oh, there it goes. If we use the left and right button, we can even go so far as to say proper over, way over, or proper under, way under. Okay, so we can shift the exposure value, brightness, and darkness with this, and get multiple photos that go dark, medium, lighter. So how is this used? Let's say that you are taking a photo in the snow. Okay, and you know that the snow is going to throw off your meter, but you don't know exactly how. So if you auto exposure bracket, you'll get 2 shots that aren't going to turn out, but one of them should. You can also use this to create different effects. You could do this to create high dynamic range images if you wanted to, or you could do this to dramatically to create dramatic low-key images, and have a couple of backups just in case you want to manually manipulate the raw files or something like that. So auto exposure bracketing is a useful way to get images with different exposures, so you have more options in post. To turn it off, you simply rotate the command wheel until all three of those lines come back to the center. Your metering mode selection allows you to select between the camera's metering modes: evaluative, partial, spot, and center weighted. Okay, so I think we've talked about these a little bit, but evaluative takes all of the different parts of the meter, the way that it's divided up in the camera, and I think it's a 35-part meter in this camera, and then it will balance those based on distance, color, brightness, things like that, to create an evaluated meter reading. The evaluative meters on Canon cameras are really good and very advanced. This is a really good setting to use most of the time. Partial metering uses a smaller area of the sensor for that. I believe it's the same basic premise, but with less of the meter area. Spot metering uses a very small spot for 100% of the metered information. And that means that, let's say you metered off of your subject's face for a portrait, you would meter exactly for your subject's face, and then the background would either be darker or lighter, or who cares, the background's not the important part of the photo. So that's a good way to use spot metering. And center weighted averaging takes an area in the center of the image, about like this, and weights it for the majority of the metering information, and then everything outside of it is the minority. And that's a good general metering mode as well. This was introduced sometime in the 70s or 80s by cameras, and a lot of very good cameras over the years have had only center-weighted metering. So 4 very good options with this camera. Custom white balance allows you to create a custom white balance. There you can see my shirt from last night. So for custom white balance, what you would do is you'd set up your tabletop studio and you'd have a white backdrop, or if you're using a colored backdrop, you would put a white sheet of paper or a white card in the studio, tabletop studio, turn on your lights as you would, take a photo of that white backdrop or that white card. Then what you would do is come into here and you would pick that photo in this menu, and then the camera would know, okay, that's supposed to be white, and convenient, I have a white shirt on, and it would save the white balance data from that photo to make that white card or white backdrop white under your custom setting. So now anytime you go back to your tabletop studio with the same lighting setting, you can go to your custom white balance and have consistent lighting in that setting over and over again. White balance shifting and bracketing. White balance bracketing has you take multiple photos with different white balance values, so you can either increase green and magenta or blue and amber if you're not sure of what kind of effect you want or what the exact color of your lighting is. You can also use the control panel to shift. So let's say you have like a weird magenta light, so you can go up here more into the green, and maybe it needs to go a little bit blue, whatever the color is. You can mess around with this to get the exact white balance you want for, say, your tabletop studio or something like that setting. But if you can't nail it, you can still adjust it and do some bracketing as well as shifting your white balance settings right here. Color space, sRGB and Adobe RGB. Unless you are really, really into the Adobe ecosystem, just leave it at standard. Using Adobe outside of the Adobe ecosystem can cause a few issues, so standard RGB is what you want. Picture style. These are your different picture style options that we talked about with this button down here in the second video. I'm going to stick with the same advice I had. Keep it at something like standard or neutral. Actually, neutral and faithful are probably your best because they don't have any modifications. And that way you can modify your images in post with a better ability, because any modifications that are made here, they're in there. If you increase the contrast or increase the sharpness to the point that it looks bad, there's no recovering that. Dust delete data. What this does is this will take a photo, and the sensor will then use that information to find dust specks on the sensor, and then it will use software to clone those out as it saves the file. Playback menu 1. Everything in both of these playback menus applies only to what happens when you're playing back images. These are all playback related customizations. Protect images allows you to go in and select specific images to protect so that they can't be deleted. Rotate images. You can manually rotate your images so that they display differently on your screen. Erase images lets you go in and select and erase specific images or all of the images on your card. Print order. If you have images, you can select the print order from them, but you would have to be connected to a printer rather, in order to do that. And transfer order allows you to prioritize the way that images are transferred to your computer. That's only true if you are connected via the USB cable. And as I think I recommended in the first or second video, you will get much faster transfer rates just popping the SD card out of here, putting that directly into your computer or your computer's SD card reader, and transferring files from your SD card as opposed to using your USB cable. That's because your SD card is going to have a faster data transfer rate than this camera's USB cable. Playback menu 2 starts off with a histogram, and if you have the histogram displaying in playback, you can choose between a brightness histogram or a red, green, blue histogram, and that's just a matter of what information you want to see if you want to have your histogram on at all. Slideshow allows you to start a slideshow if you have images on your SD card. And image jump with the command wheel up here. This is adjusting the command wheel. Do you want your command wheel to move you 1, 10, or 100 images? Or do you want it to move you through your images by date, only through the movies, or only through the stills? Just a matter of personal preference and how you plan to use your camera when you play back images. We're going to go here into the setup menu, the first tab, and this is where we start getting into some really good configuration items that help you control exactly how your camera is going to perform. This first one is auto power off. How long do you want the camera to stay on after you've stopped touching a button? Anywhere from 30 seconds to off. Strictly a matter of battery preservation here, and how many batteries you want to carry and how many batteries you want to drain between changes. I leave it on 15 minutes for these videos because it is annoying as all get out when the camera turns off every 30 seconds when I'm talking in a setting like this. File numbering, continuous, auto reset, or manual reset. Continuous means that the file numbering will start at 0001 and go to 9999 before wrapping again. And I think then it goes to 0000. Auto reset will cause the numbering to reset, I believe, each time you create a different folder or the camera creates a different folder. And manual reset will send it back to 0001 from whatever number you're at. I recommend continuous because if you have 3 or 4 or 5 different folders on your camera and you try to move all of those files onto your computer, you might end up having 3, 4, 5 different files with the exact same name, and then it becomes a real pain to manage those images. It's less likely that you'll accidentally have images trying to overwrite each other if you have 10,000 different file names to use instead of having 5 iterations of 0001. Auto rotate on, or off. Auto rotating here on top is camera and computer, so your thumbnail on your computer and your playback on your camera will automatically rotate so that portrait orientation images will be letterboxed. This auto rotates only for the thumbnails on your computer, and nothing auto rotates. So this is a matter of personal preference and how you want to have your images display on your computer and your camera. Format would allow me to format the memory card so that you can start over from scratch, or if you just got a memory card brand new and put it in, this will create all of the file structures that are needed for your card to start taking photos. Liquid crystal display LCD auto off, enable or disable. Does the display automatically turn off? I thought it was with the eye sensors, but it's either with the eye sensors or when you are after a certain amount of time. Let's find out. Oh, it is with the eye sensors. Okay. So this one with enable, if you set it to enable, whenever you put your eye up to the viewfinder, what's going to happen is that this screen will automatically turn off so you don't have a bright glare in the bottom of your eye, and this will make it a little bit easier for you to focus and see in the viewfinder. And the last one in tab 1 here is your screen color. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Matter of personal preference and how you want to see your information on your screen, what colors you find pleasing. We're going to come in here to set up menu tab 2. LCD brightness is simply how bright or dim you want your LCD screen to be. Number 7 is really good for outdoors. Number 1 is really good for indoors, for instance. Date and time. You can adjust your date and time here, as well as adjusting your date and time format. Language. Here are the different languages you can choose from. Video system, NTSC or PAL. This is both for video output and for recording. If you are in an NTSC region, you want to select NTSC. If you're in a PAL region, you want to select PAL. Sensor cleaning. This auto cleaning will start up here. Enable or disable. Do you want the sensor to automatically clean itself when your camera turns on and turns off? I recommend enable for this, because the more opportunities your camera has to clean the sensor, the more opportunities you have to not have to clone out dust spots on your images in post. Clean now allows you, will lock up the mirror and the shutter as well, so you can get into the sensor to clean it off with a bulb blower and a brush if you would like to. Or clean now rather, will clean the sensor as it does its startup and shut down right now. Clean manually will lock up the mirror and shutter so that you can get in there with a bulb blower and a brush. Live view function settings. These are things that affect what you see in live view. So live view shooting, enable or disable. Do you want to be able to take photos from live view? And if yes, then enable. I recommend leaving this to enable because this will just make it easier to use live view more conveniently. Grid display, off, 1 or 2. These are different. This is a rule of thirds grid, and this is a more densely packed grid. And what these do is give you the ability on your live view only to have a grid overlay. Does not save in the photos, just displays on live view, so that you can make sure that your horizontals are horizontal and your verticals are vertical. I recommend using a grid here because that is a really easy way to help your photos when you're in live view turn out better. The metering time, 4 seconds to 30 minutes in these different increments. How long do you want your light meter to stay on after you have to press the shutter button? Matter of personal preference here. The light meter doesn't use that much battery power. Autofocus mode, live mode, smiley face live mode, or quick mode. And this applies to how autofocus works in live view. Standard, live mode is where your autofocus will look for a face, and quick mode is where the autofocus will focus as quickly as it can. So it's just a matter of personal preference. If you're doing a lot of portrait photography in live mode, then definitely use the face setting. The last tab in the setup menu is going to be the custom functions, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. Clearing the settings allows you to remove all of the settings, and the firmware version it displays down here. The final firmware version for this camera is 1.1.2, so you can see that this camera is using the final firmware version. My menu allows you to add items here that you use very often. So we're going to click OK, and we're going to register an item. Let's register quality because it's right on top. So you can put the quality function right here in your My Menu. So anytime you go into My Menu, then what you can do is have that quality adjustment right there, and you don't have to hunt for it. Okay, what about, let's register a different one. Here we go. Shutter AE lock button. You can register this one as well. And now what we see is we have these two items, shutter AE lock and quality. But you know what? I just realized I want the shutter AE lock to be up on top. So what you can do, we'll go back and I'll show you that again. You go to sort, select the one that you want to move, hit set, and then move it to the place you want it to be. Hit set again, and you've changed the position. But you know what? Actually, I don't really find that I'm using shutter AE lock all that often, so I can go into delete and select this one, delete it from my menu, and it's still in the menu. You can still access it. It's just not on my menu anymore. If you realize you've really messed up your My Menu and you don't want to have any items on there, you're not using them at all, you can go into delete all items and wipe out your entire My Menu. And then the last option here is display from My Menu. So what you can do here is set this to enable. And if you use My Menu, setting this to enable is a good idea because every time you hit the menu button, it'll go straight to My Menu, and all of your My Menu items will be right at your disposal. Okay, last thing that we're going to be going through are all of these custom functions, of which there are 13. Each of these custom functions is broken out in the video description with a link to it specifically, so if there's a specific custom function you're looking for, all you have to do is go to that link. Also, if you see down here on the bottom, underneath each item, there's a 0. 0 means factory default. So if there's something other than a 0, that means that there's been a specific setting that's been changed there. Custom function 1 is what stop increment you want your meter, shutter speed, and aperture to work in, third or half stop. If you're shooting RAW, this does not matter because you have way more control over your exposure than you need with either of these, but it's going to default to a third stop because that gives you more control. A half stop will allow you to scroll less as you scroll through shutter speeds and things like that. Matter of personal preference with this, how you want to have it set up. Custom function 2 is your ISO expansion, and this is going to be off or on. Do you want to have expanded high ISO? If you're going to be doing something like astrophotography, you can set this to on. You're not going to actually use the photos from the high ISO because they're super noisy, but you can take shorter photos after you get things set up and make sure that your image is composed as you would want. So that'd be a good way to use high ISO with this camera. And you can see down there under item 2 now, I have a blue 1 indicating that that's been changed. The custom function 3 is your flash sync speed in aperture value mode. This only applies to the AV mode on your mode dial. So your options are auto, 1/200th to 1/60th, and 1/200th only. With auto, the camera will pick the best shutter speed for your flash and setting, but it will not go faster than 1/200th. With 1/200th to 1/60th, the camera will pick the best shutter speed in that range only. So the difference between 0 and 1 is that in 0, you could theoretically have a 1-second shutter speed with your flash sync set to on. And then 2, you have a fixed shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. With 2, what that means, with 1, it's going to give you a slightly greater amount of ambient light that can reach the sensor if it does a 1/60th of a second versus a 1/200th. With fixing it at 1/200th of a second, all of your exposure control is going to be coming from the aperture and the flash power. Your shutter will only be at 1/200th of a second. So if you're going to really be using flash a lot with this camera, these are different settings to play around with and see which ones you enjoy and how they complement or improve or harm your photographic style. Custom function 4 is your long exposure noise reduction. So there are 3 options: off, auto, and on. Off means that the camera will not do any long exposure noise reduction. Auto means it will if it thinks it needs to, and on means it always will whenever there's a long exposure. And I don't remember what the exact definition of long exposure is. One thing to remember about this camera is it's a decade old as of this video's recording, more than. The algorithms for noise reduction in this camera are way out of date compared to what you can get with a free video or photo editing software online. So I would leave this to off and just do noise reduction in post. Custom function 5 is your high ISO speed noise reduction. And this is similar. Where the last one worked on a long exposure noise reduction, this applies when you have high ISO selected. So standard, low, strong, and disabled are your 4 options here. And standard, low, and strong are the amount of noise reduction when you shoot high ISO. Disabled means no noise reduction when you shoot high ISO. And for the same reason we just talked about in custom function number 4, I'm going to suggest disabled here. This is a camera that I really wouldn't recommend using high ISOs with in the first place. But if you do, you're going to get better noise reduction in any modern photo editing software. Custom function 6, highlight tone priority, enable or disable. What this will do is this will tell the camera to meter and expose for highlight tones. If you're shooting RAW, this is a good thing to enable, because what will happen is highlights, when they blow out, especially on a camera of this age, they're lost. Shadows can still be recovered fairly well in RAW. So if you set this to enable and shoot in RAW, you will have your highlights preserved, and then you can in post you can recover your shadows more easily in your raw file. Custom function 7, auto lighting optimizer, standard, low, strong, or disable. And this is basically HDR light. Do you want to artificially increase the dynamic range of your images with a standard, a low, or a strong amount of artificial adjustment? I'm going to recommend disable again, because if you're shooting raw in this camera, you can recover more dynamic range in raw with any even free raw editor than this camera is going to be able to. Custom function 8, autofocus assist beam firing, enable, disable, or only using the external flash. So if you are in low light, do you want to allow the autofocus beam, which is the light on the front of the camera, to fire, yes or no? Or, as a third option, you can set this to only use an autofocus assist beam on an external flash, like a speedlight, Canon speedlight flash, and not the one on the camera. So just a matter of personal preference and shooting style, what you want to have this setting be. Custom function 9, mirror lockup, enable or disable. With disable, your camera is going to function properly. You take a photo, the mirror will open, the shutter will trigger, you'll take a photo, and then you go on to the next one. With enable, you enter what's called mirror lockup mode. Press the shutter button once and the mirror locks up. Press the shutter button again, and then you take the photo. This is good to enable if you're going to do something like star trails, microscopy, macro work, something that you don't want to have any shutter shake at all, because that will, enabling this will disable any sort of shutter shake from the mirror slap. But for normal shooting, you just want to have this on disable, because having to hit the shutter button twice to take every photo is a little annoying. Okay, in the second video, we punted the AEL AFL button up here, right, the asterisk. This is where we're going to talk about how that button functions. Autofocus and auto exposure lock. When you press the asterisk button, it locks your focus, it locks your exposure settings. Is auto exposure lock, and what this means is that when you press the asterisk button, your metering and your focusing are done separately. So you press the asterisk to focus, and you press the shutter button halfway to lock your exposure. So basically, this second option turns your. Did I get that right? Okay. I'm trusting myself that I wrote this down from the manual correctly, where this basically turns the asterisk button into an AF on button, where the asterisk operates autofocus, and then the shutter button, after pressing it, locks the auto exposure. 2 is AF lock, no AE lock. So what this does is, in autofocus servo mode, you use the asterisk button to shut off autofocus while it's depressed, and then the exposure is calculated when the image is taken. So for 2, it's a good setting for things like a basketball game, where you want to photograph a specific player who may move in front of or behind other players. And option 3 is no auto exposure lock. The asterisk turns the autofocus on and off, and the exposure is calculated when the image is taken. And this is good for a subject where good for settings where the subject may start and stop rapidly, such as like kids at play. So how you use these? This one's got to be backwards. So this one must mean that number one's got to mean that the asterisk locks auto exposure and autofocus continues until the photo's taken. I think that's correct. I think I mistranscribed that in my notes. Anyway, so this is just a matter of personal preference and how you want to use the asterisk button on your camera. Custom function 11 is how your set button, this button right here, functions when you're outside of the menu system, and you have a bunch of different options. You can access your quick control screen, which is the default in what we saw in video 2. You can go straight to your image quality setting. You can access your flash exposure compensation setting. Turn your LCD on or off, which means it's duplicating the functionality of this display button up here. Access your menu button, which means it's duplicating the functionality of the menu button up here, or disabled, having no function. Honestly, the best use for this is going to be to get to your quick controls, because that's a fast way to make adjustments to your camera's function. The rest of these are either duplicative or for very specific single use cases. Custom function 12 is your LCD display when powered on, display, or retain power off status. I generally recommend leaving this to display because this way what you can do is when you turn on your power, your LCD screen will turn on, and that's just a good indication that your camera has turned on, and you can quickly check to see how much battery life you have. With option 1, when you turn your camera on, you'll have to hit the display button to get the display to turn on. And our final custom function is number 13, which is add the origin decision data. So your options here are off or on. What this does is origin decision data adds data to your the EXIF part of your image files that will help verify that an image is original and that it hasn't been modified, and that also that it's from this camera. So this is good for like photojournalists or somebody like that, or people who are doing evidence collection who need to prove and have additional backup that the image that's being shown was taken with this specific camera and that it wasn't modified. And that is it for the custom functions on the Rebel T1i, and that is actually everything for the EOS Rebel T1i. Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope this video series really helped you learn how to use your camera very well.